like never before, and a budget that such a year called for. It came at a tricky time, it delivered on most asks, and it conquered, going by the market sentiments at least. We economists are a different breed, though. We look beyond the headline numbers to understand durable impact on fundamentals. And that's precisely what we aim to cover this evening. At the outset, I must thank Mr. Tyagarajan and SYFX Treasury Foundation for the opportunity. It's a huge privilege to be a part of All Women Economists panel, but more importantly, a panel that covers economists from across the banking and financial market spectrum. What better way to get a rounded view on union budget and how it changes our outlook for the economy and key assets? So delving straight into the topic, a little before COVID hit, we as an economy were staring at a growth print of 4.2%, a dismal number by all means. Private consumption was sequentially dropping. Investment cycle had been sluggish for past many years, and government was fast running out of fiscal space to support growth. Uh, Most economic agents were running risk averse, and the FPI inflows into the economy were around 80% lower than 2019 average. And then the pandemic hit. 5% growth numbers suddenly started looking very good compared to the 23% contraction the next year. As pandemic fear receded, however, in the later part of the year, the rebound has surprised on the upside as well. Consumption levels have bounced back to a positive YOY zone, much ahead than the rest of the world. Manufacturing activities are reporting all-time highs, and services activities are picking up fast as well. So as we rebuild the India growth story in 2021, hopefully with a post-COVID backdrop, comparative numbers will of course look attractive. But that's just the magic of numbers. In terms of real economic activities, we will revert to pre-COVID levels not before 2022 end. And beyond immediate revival, sustainable engines of growth remain tentative. And it was in this context that budget announcements became extremely critical for our growth outlook. And it has managed to address both the immediate ask in terms of health expenditure or job revival, and also the structural ask in terms of capex push or infra focus. So while the details point towards an upside potential over next 2 to 3 years, the policy normalization impact will probably keep the asset market very volatile. And I look forward to an engaging evening with my fellow panelists as we delve deeper into the nuances of this fundamentals and asset market interplay into the next year. So, Radhika, let's step back a bit with you on this issue. Of course, what's your take on growth outlook for now, and has it changed materially after the budget announcements? But more importantly, actually, what I want to understand is, India is relatively ahead for now in terms of recovery front on the pandemic. And some of the global economies are still struggling. So, what are the key risks if, let's say, the global growth disappoints and that doesn't materialize as per expectation? Will it really have an impact on Indian growth outlook as well?
Thanks, Rajni. I think I will just very quickly recap what's happening, all over. So we are essentially entering into 2021. I think it's a bifurcated world, right? You've got developed markets that routinely lead the show. They are underperforming to a certain extent. It's because they have still not been able to get on top of the infection curve, and hence growth overall has been not doing well. You've got in some countries, particularly Eurozone, it does look like they still have some monetary policy space left, and the US is still considering more fiscal stimulus. So conditions are pretty easy there, but of course, because of low base effects last year, so you would see growth average about 2 to 4% within the G3 countries. Coming to Asia again, it's going to be a strong rebound this year, but there will be a divergence in terms of pace. But Asia will be an outperformer, because there are many tailwinds behind Asia in particular, because financial conditions are easier, vaccine rollout is happening. You've got also China, which is resilient at this stage, and adding to overall growth. Plus, there's the tailwind from a strong trade cycle. So I think these things are certainly helping Asia outperform as compared to the West, so to speak. And amongst these, we would think that because the extent of improvement will vary. You would see few countries, particularly China, Taiwan, Vietnam, perform better in 2021. They already grew in 2020 as against everyone else contracting. And then you will see India and few ASEAN countries probably get back in terms of real growth by end year. And you will see this other chunk which is underperforming, which is basically Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, because again, either infection curves are high or they've got more tourism, adding into their growth. So India in particular, I think we are at the cusp of a cyclical rebound. To a great extent, it is helping. Base effects are helping, and it is going to help in fiscal 22, as also domestic momentum. But to answer your question, if global growth falters, we would think, I mean, it's not in a great shape already, but if it does falter, it might take off some points of growth overall, particularly through the trade cycle. But I don't think it will really tilt the balance very adversely. So we are, because it's going to be mainly domestic driven and vaccine rollouts are already happening, I would think that double-digit growth expectation that is likely from India. I mean, our forecast is at about 10.5%. Market expectations are probably a bit higher, but I would think that won't derail this rebound that is already taking shape. So certainly a favorable global environment helps, but lack of one will not derail the growth story completely.
Good to hear that. So, which basically means that we are looking at a very strong domestic momentum and kind of that continues irrespective of how the global winds are blowing. So, Upasana, taking this forward, IMF mentions 11.5% as growth expectation for the next year. Government has set up a nominal growth expectation target of 14.4%. And consensus seems to be around 15% of nominal growth, 5% on inflation, somewhere around 10% ballpark of real growth. And of course, each of us have our own nuances to the number. Where do you stand on this? And more importantly, what's the kind of risk that you foresee, especially if global backdrop doesn't seem to be a big risk, as Radhika mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. I would tend to agree with Radhika. I think as we go ahead, we are a little conservative, I would say. So we are at 9.3% of GDP, but nonetheless, that's a rebound going ahead. And if the government was to execute whatever they have announced for this year, for the next year, I do see an upside risk to our own real GDP numbers. Having said that, the risks that we foresee are, some of them are very obvious. For example, any delays in the vaccines, any resurgence in the infections across the world or in India. These are some of the obvious ones. Probably monsoons also, I would say that tends to play a very important role. So that could hamper rural demand, which has been standing for us, at least in the last 1 year that we have seen. Besides that, I would say, for me, there are 2 points of concern. One is the commodity prices. So the headwinds could be coming from that side, wherein we could see some kind of adverse shocks there. Apart from that, my bigger worry is in terms of how the informal sector really is performing. So for me, I would say that I would assign a much higher weightage in terms of trying to understand how the informal sector's revival is. Because what we see right now on the ground is all the data which is pertaining largely to the formal segments. And that's where the divergence probably is. How fast they recover, whether they will recover, there are a lot of question marks there. And that's where I would be a little more worried on. So the K-shaped recovery, which has been coined by IMF earlier, I think that is something which I would be worried on, wherein the inequality has risen quite a bit. And going into next year, do we see this converge really? Will be probably in part addressed by the fact that the government is talking a lot on construction-linked activities, let's say, because of the infrastructure focus. But we'll have to see as it goes. So I do remain worried on the informal sector revival for now.
So Anubhuti, I'll take this actually to you. So it's exactly this kind of a K-shaped revival that has kind of prompted government to go for a capex and an infra push at this point. When its fiscal space was so tight as well. Does it really materially change your growth expectations after the budget announcements? And I mean, both the real growth expectation and the potential growth also over the next 2 to 3 years. Do you see a big change?
Absolutely. I won't say, like quantifying the change is something for which we will need to see how well the implementation of the budget plans take place. But it clearly poses an upside risk to most of the growth forecasts which exist on the street today. We ourselves expect a 10% real GDP growth for fiscal year 22 after a contraction of -8% in FY21. But if we simply focus on the extent of fiscal push which the government has given, a market, even if we take the off-budget borrowing, probably was not looking anything more than looking at a budget deficit of not more than 5.8% of GDP. And I don't think many expected states to be allowed a deficit towards 4% of GDP. So it's almost 1 to 1.5% higher than what the market was penciling in. And if you look at the fiscal multipliers, it between 1 to 2.5x, depending on whether the thrust is on revenue or capital expenditure. So I think the upside surprise on a real GDP growth forecast can actually translate. We'll definitely keep a close eye on how the implementation plays out, because a lot of money has been towards capex. The other thing which can also throw an upside surprise is, which other panelists have referred in their brief comments, is on the vaccination. Unlike, say, US and Europe, where vaccination has been rolled out when infection rates are at the peak, in case of India, vaccination has been rolled out when infections are consistently declining. And there are a lot of studies which are going on that probably India has a better resilience towards the pandemic. Of course, we are not out of woods yet. But if infection are not under control, even if the vaccination pace is not as as not as the government has planned, I think that can push us back towards a much better growth trajectory, not only for FY22 but also for FY20. So not only for FY22 but also for FY23. On a 3 to 5 years time frame, for FY23, FY24, we were looking at a growth number of 5 to 5.5%. But since the fiscal push is sustained, we will reach 4.5% central government's fiscal target only by FY26, as indicated by the finance minister. I think we can clearly expect some upside surprise on our real GDP growth forecast over next 2 to 4 years. Key elements to watch, however, is the implementation ability.
So Madhvi, if I take this to you, going by the equity market reaction, they clearly see much more upside potential to the current levels. What's your take? How are your clients responding?
To be very fair, see, the growth outturn in the last 2 quarters has been much better than most of us expected. The corporate earnings surprisingly have been very, very, doing very well. So the early part of the corporate earnings, being better was largely owing to the higher buffer on the savings front via wage and admin costs, which was essentially saved. The demand push is probably more of a third quarter story, but that, I think it needs to be reckoned that India has clearly broken the link between virus spread and mobility much earlier and much better than what most countries are experiencing at this point in time, and much better than what even we expected. So consequently, we are seeing the household risk aversion has sort of abated sooner than expected. There has been consistent, progressive return towards pre-COVID levels. I think for the private sector, activity is largely 90% plus of the pre-COVID level by October, November itself, and have been inching up since then. More importantly, it has been complemented very well by the pickup in the central government's spending, which is likely to go up even in the fourth quarter if we understand, if we see the budget revised numbers for the current year. So clearly that would also give impetus to the growth bit. So I think probably the third quarter itself will see growth coming back into the positive territory, not as much as probably in the range of 0.5% or something of that sort, and probably around 2.5% in the fourth quarter. So I think for the year itself, we'll probably be reaching somewhere around 6.5-7% contraction, as against a double-digit contraction that we were envisaging beginning of the year. So that at least from that extent, the policymakers have been sort of lucky as well that the response of the economy has been much better than expected. But that said, I think we need to go past this excitement, because the growth bounce may, as other panels were also mentioning about, we need to sort of remove the wheat from the chaff, because the current recovery is appeared to be driven by capital and profits, not by labor and wages. So this so-called patchy K-shaped recovery, it needs to be seen in the context of the potentially scarring and divided labor markets, and how it, how the income shock at the bottom of the pyramid and the transfer of income from the bottom to the top, if it remains permanent, what it could mean for the growth and the demand levers going ahead, whether the demand could actually lose their vigor, because there's a quasi-permanent income loss that has happened at the bottom of the pyramid, which has a much higher propensity to consume, while the upper end is probably just having a more of a pent-up demand release. So somewhere we need to see whether we sustain that momentum. Of course, next year will have a benefit of the base effect and the fact that there is some natural improvement in activity. But I think the policymakers to that extent have taken a very decisive move with regard to the medium-term productivity of the economy, with regard to spending on the capex front, which will have a higher multiplier effect, as Anubhuti was mentioning about. So I think while we may reach the pre-pandemic level by probably December of CY21, whether we go past that and probably increase the potential to more than 6.5-7% that we were seeing pre-pandemic, it's something that will still remain a challenge. And I think policy lever on that front will remain a big support, and more to the fiscal one, because monetary is already sort of at its brink in terms of giving any delta to the economy.
So then in that context, I think budget has kind of managed to tick all the right boxes. It kind of started pushing on the capex, infra for job revival, stable sentiments in the market, stable tax policies. So every which ways, it kind of seems to have ticked all the right button. The immediate ask in terms of, health outlay and stressed ARC for stressed assets. So all parts of the economy kind of seem to have got what their key ask was in a post-COVID year. What is it about that excites each of you? And I'll probably, kind of turn the table one by one to understand what are your major takeaways, for 3 major takeaways from this budget. Upasana, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'd say that this budget, clearly it's pro-growth and yet not populist. So, this is a very good combination, I would say. The focus is clearly on infrastructure. And
it's a difficult balance, always.
Yeah, and they've kind of tried to strike that pretty well. Yeah. So growth without populism, very good. Again, I would say that they have continued to show their intent towards the localization drive that they have. So, the focus again towards erasing the supply side bottlenecks to boost the domestic manufacturing base. So I think all in all, these are the 2 things I would say. The third, I think another important aspect I would like to put across is the intent toward reforms and transparency. So that is another important aspect, because clearly, banking sector reforms, which have been talked about, reforms, or you can say measures to tackle the infrastructure bottlenecks through financing that they've tried to address. So the intent for reforms continues. And alongside, there is also a reform or a corrective measure by ensuring that there is transparency in the balance sheet as well, by at least in part taking on the off-balance sheet items again within the budget documents. So I think that is also important to keep in mind. So from a medium-term perspective, this does suggest a clear intent of the government on transparency.
So Madhvi, taking this forward to you, what is it that the equity market is taking away most convincingly from this budget to be so excited about?
I think the most important thing, as Upasana also mentioned, was transparency. And the fact that, they have gone beyond the convention to ensure the effective fiscal stance does not become pro-cyclical. I mean, while you're looking at from 9.5 to 6.8% fiscal deficit contraction, effective fiscal stance, given the fact that the expenditure to GDP ratio is still around 15.5%, as against the average pre-pandemic, which was around 12.5, 13%, is, it's something which essentially shows that your fiscal stance effectively is not pro-cyclical, it's still counter-cyclical. And more importantly, trying to do some innovative financial sector reforms, better resource allocation in general, which essentially will imply that the ability of the sector to be able to fund the recovery is going to be much better. Things like ARC-led resolution that they have been talking about, bad bank or privatization of two PSU banks, is something that would be a little difficult for them to really execute, but I think the intent is pretty much right. And thirdly, and more importantly, going very aggressive on the asset sale bit, again, trying to, beyond just the disinvestment of strategic and non-strategic, companies, they're also trying to now sort of trying to monetize the existing functional infra sector, which they were doing in the past as well, but I think they're going much more aggressive on that front. The reinstitution of the modified DFI model, which again will fund the infra pipeline, is something that is exciting. But again, execution will be the key, because this DFI model, while was a major lever for infra in the 80s and the 90s, it did fail because of some institutional, lacks. So I think when they reinstitute the same, I think they need to really ensure that the regulatory framework is much more tighter, and it should be able to sort of lever itself well in a fashion that it could fund the medium-term capex story that India is playing out at this point in time. But I think market was excited, one, because there was not much of a change in the tax bit, which essentially implies that the supply side economics also continues to support the fiscal theme. Certainty with regard to economics, current economic regime, which also sort of adds to positivity with regard to private sector capex whenever it really kicks off. So I think 2-3 things which are very important that I mentioned are something which are exciting the equity market.
So on to you, Anubhuti. What excites you the most about this budget? What are you taking back most convincingly?
I think the most exciting part of this budget was that it was very well timed. The finance minister, including the government, kept on telling us that they would do a big expenditure increase when the time is right. And markets, including us, probably underpriced the ability of the government to deliver on what they had said over the last 9 to 10 months. And it's one of the best timings which one could have asked for. And the multiplier impact, as the government indicated right in the beginning, would certainly be much higher, because the confidence levels are far, far better. The propensity to save will be much lesser. So for me, the biggest positive was the timing of this announcement. The second big positive for me is a sustained fiscal push. Unlike other countries who decided probably to put in money for a year or two, the government has clearly showed its hand or intent that they are here to support the economy for the next 5 years. And that's an important departure, because over the last 5 years, we have consistently been in an useless exercise of trying to overestimate or overpresent the revenues, underspend, and somehow try to keep our fiscal deficit artificially low. I think giving up, acknowledging the reality of the economy is a big thing which has come from the government. And by giving a clear roadmap for next 5 years, I think the government has clearly underlined its intent that the focus is now on growth. And that's a very big positive for me. The third part, I would echo what has been said by Upasana as well as Madhvi. I think transparency. One big ask from the industries and economists at large has been not about fiscal stimulus, but about government releasing what is due to the economy, pending dues. If we talk about FY21 fiscal deficit, the 9.5% fiscal deficit is not primarily because they are doing a lot of capex or they're doing a lot of revenue expenditure. Those have happened, but they're also clearing up a lot of pending dues. This is extremely important, and possibly also factoring in the right amount of tax refunds which have to happen to the rest of the economy, then probably that's why the budgeted estimates on revenues are looking very conservative to us. So if the government really has taken that into account, that we'll be transparent, we will release whatever is due to the economy and not focus just in terms of increasing expenditure. If that thought process is right at my end, then I think that's a big change, from the government side, and it will clearly push growth higher.
And Radhika, on to you on this. Anything to add apart from expectation management, which I hear most loudly in terms of getting it right?
I think it's the toughest to come last in this kind of. Well, let me try. I think one of my first reactions after seeing the budget was, I remember 3 R's. Firstly, it is more realistic, even if it's more conservative, right? So I think that's something that had summed up by the other panelists as well. I think there is a push towards more real sector instead of just demand. So a supply side push. And the third one being that it's more, it's trying to restore credibility to the math. So I think those really stood out as an essence of the budget. But let me just take two more. I mean, this being the first, so I'll take two more. One is the establishment of a medium-term framework. I think that was something that was given in the past, but I think it was a bit ambitious because whenever we had a center fiscal deficit, there used to be this never-ending need to go towards that, utopian 3%, and that has been happening for quite a few years now, almost a decade plus, and every year you would see that push back a bit. I think from that perspective, taking a 4.5% and over the next 5 years also tells you that they aren't in a hurry to consolidate and being more realistic about it. So it's a glide path, but it's not a very stringent and not a very restricted glide path. So it's going to be more gradual. And there is something to map your numbers against. So every year, we will be able to do that. The only underlying condition is that growth has to kind of meet the expectations. So the funds financing has to really go where it's been promised to ensure that that kind of GDP, deficit GDP can be sustained. But nonetheless, I think it's very encouraging that they've gone through a realistic medium-term framework and taken a very gradual glide path. The third one, from my perspective, would be that we had expected, and I think that is again true of India, true of the region as well, that in 2020, the central banks, the monetary policy had taken a very proactive role, right? By default, the monetary policy is nimble, so they're able to act much faster. And RBI, I think, was front and center, right? So they cut rates, fighting fires in FX, bond market, dollar delusion, all of that. So we had expected, and I mean, of course, the government did its bit, but the central bank monetary policy action was much more. We had expected that that shift would happen this year when the baton gets passed to the fiscal policy. And without those expectations, one went into the budget and it was pleasantly met. So because of, like Anubhuti mentioned, there's a capex push, and it is they're taking a more medium-term approach. It tells you that they're not happy with just boosting growth in the very short term. They want to do it more gradually, and they want to do it over a period of time. So certainly the need for monetary policy to pump prime has gone down. Of course, their attention will be on the borrowing market, right? We might discuss this later in the discussion today, but that part I think has not come down. But I think pump priming by way of additional liquidity, by way of cuts, has certainly reduced, and that's why we think the central bank will kind of settle into a pause. But the baton has been shifted, so it is on to fiscal policy now to take us down a more durable growth path. I think fiscal 22 is going to stand out because of double-digit growth. We really need to look beyond 23 to 26.
So this was something that was our ask much before COVID hit as well, right? I mean, most of us economists were batting for, when all the economic agents are running risk averse, government has to front load expenditure, government has to front load the investment. And economic survey now finally came out with, very strongly on how government needs to, think beyond just the rating impact to front load all the expenditure. But in the process, of course, the fiscal deficit numbers and the borrowing program goes awry altogether. So something that was worrying them at that point of time hasn't really gone away from the horizon, so to say. 9.5% of a GDP fiscal deficit this year, 6.8 next year. The target is to 4.5 by 26. And of course, all the risk in between from now till 26 remain persistent as well. And India haven't had very great history in terms of following its fiscal discipline. So, Anubhuti, let me start this with you. How are you looking at this higher deficit number? I mean, when do you see this normalizing? Do you have a sense on how credible will this fiscal glide path stay to its targets? Or this 3.5% of GDP or FRBM remains ever elusive to us?
I think the 4.5% glide path which the government has given is far more realistic, and I would really hope that they stick to it rather than trying to go back to 3.5%. 3.5% or 3% of FRBM targets are extremely important to be watchful of, but then the growth environment has to be very different. in current environment where we have been hit by a pandemic so much that the real GDP size for India at the end of March 22 will be almost similar to what it was at the end of March 20. India has effectively lost 2 years, and you need to be supportive if you want growth to come back. Unlike other countries, and India has a large population, and not only large, but young population. So I would say that if we are staying above 3% for next 5 years, no issues about it. The only thing is that running a loose fiscal policy has to come with better growth rates. So while the government has taken step one very well, it's a welcome move, they need to focus on implementation. And post FY26, we can clearly come back to 3.5% once things are under better control.
Radhika, how will the overseas investors look at this? I mean, FPI flows into debt instruments were negative, and almost an outflow of $14 billion in 2020. Even January has been negative. How do you think they will react to it? Because that's one flow that we credibly count on for capital requirements.
I think the environment is very different at this point. I mean, the general taboo that one would associate with higher deficits and debt has certainly dissipated, right? There seems to be a much more tolerance, much more forgiving of higher debt levels. In fact, we often compare that QE used to be a matter of Western countries only used to do QE, but this time around, last year, 2020, you did see some Asian countries also involve themselves in it. Again, markets were very forgiving. So I would think the first reaction to the budget has certainly been very positive. I mean, in some conversations that we have had, and this 9.5% for fiscal 21, again, not much of surprise, because there is a transparency element. There is also this need to spend more towards the economy, and that has been met. I think the slightly higher fiscal 22 is something that seemed to be a bit higher than, especially when consensus expectations came out. And from that perspective, what happens is that then your attention quickly shifts to what makes up that 6.8%, and it also makes up to what happens to then overall debt levels, right? So I think that's where the focus shifts. And particularly because even before the pandemic, our public debt levels are among the highest in the region. So hence that seems to get more attention. And now that we're going to be upwards of 85%, I think that certainly becomes a more important looking point. So while the budget is being highly appreciated for being realistic and for being a lot more conservative, optimistic, forward-looking, I think that argument we will come back to on overall debt levels will happen. And in terms of some of the comments that say rating agencies have made since, one is quite optimistic about it, seeing the positives in terms of the reforms and the institutionalization, particularly for the banking sector, taking it in its counting that as a big positive. But the other has been a bit more I wouldn't say pessimistic, but a bit more cautious on the view. I think putting all these things together for an investor, the budget overall was a positive takeaway, but some of the question marks that they would have is, how fast growth can come back to support all the spending plans, and also that overall debt level, debt as a percentage of GDP for public debt has to gradually come down. I think these would be two questions that they would watch quite closely. Apart from, of course, we assume all the way that all the spending plans that have been laid out are met at regular intervals, particularly things like national interest, NIP is going to be one of the most important, where the center plays a very important part, but so do the states and the private sector as well.
So Upasana, let's take this forward. The fiscal deficit stays on an elevated path for next 5 years, 6 years by all indication. The matrix don't really improve very quickly, Does that make rating agencies really irrelevant? I mean, a case that Economic Survey makes very strongly. Because on the other hand, we are also pushing for inclusion of our debt instruments on the global EM farm. So somewhere probably we are not as worried about changes in flows if there is a rating change. Possibly that's what government is thinking. But what's your take? How do you see this rating implications or change in flows? Because fiscal metrics don't look like they'll revert very quickly.
So here, Rajni, I would say one thing that, which I think Anubhuti and Radhika were trying to echo. The point here is that at this point where we stand, the rating agencies should ideally look at the growth prospects which come about along with the increase or the fiscal impulse that is being provided over the course of next 5 years. So bottom line is, if all the other parameters for the rating agencies remain intact and they are stable, then the debt levels, which, that just raises our medium-term growth prospects, and eventually the confidence with which we can bring down debt in future comes ahead. Now, the point here is, very crucial here is, there is no alternative to a higher growth path from here. If there is any risk to that, we will have to ensure that doesn't really happen. So the point is clear. We need a high growth. We have to ensure execution of everything that is getting announced right now. And initially what we need is the government push, because the private sector will only come with a lag. So for now, we are all rejoicing the budget numbers. Why? Because we are seeing the right intent, but that has to be implemented well so that we can see a high growth. And if high growth is there, I would not lose my sleep over rating agencies probably downgrading India or so. But yes, it is important, because if we do intend to become a part of global bond index, then we need to stay investment grade. So it is important. But for now, my sense is that global rating agencies would be probably looking at the medium-term prospects of growth, which is positive for now. And especially in the context that all other parameters that we have in terms of external sector matrix, in terms of institutional basis, everything else remains fairly stable for India. So one parameter, not good for sure, but it does provide hope if growth can be sustained at a high level.
Fair enough. But then the other part of your textbook explanation is in terms of inflationary impact. And Madhvi, if you could take this forward, there will be an alongside inflationary pickup as well. We most likely, pause that 3%, 4% kind of inflation that we have seen in last few years. And that to a certain extent also undermines the effectiveness of monetary policy to support in any which ways. That's almost becoming a global theme in terms of fiscal dominance of monetary policy. Central banks are more debt managers to the government's fiscal plan, borrowing plans than anything else. So how do you see that playing out in India?
I'll start with the global bit firstly. I think a part of it is a little overrated from global central bank's point of view. While I understand that financial repression in a larger theme is basically how central bank policies, including asset purchases and lower negative interest rate, actually tend to support the fiscal school of thought. But technically speaking, if you really go back and see, into history, there's not been very systematic relationship between government bond issuances or the amount of bonds that these global central bankers have been buying. Rather, most of their central bank measures in the West have been essentially to deliver stable financial conditions or inflation management in general, or return of inflation, so to say. Sovereign bond issuance is just one factor that affects those conditions. But apart from that, there are other factors like how the nominal growth is generally picking up, or how investor risk appetite is there, or if there's any threat to price stability in general. And very honestly speaking, financial markets are neither very rational nor efficient. So they are prone to panic and instability, and there could be acute period of stress, which could even be the case in India for that matter, which could lead to a considerable wedge between the country's effective cost of borrowing, which is justified by economic fundamentals, and actual financial conditions, which essentially leads to a self-fulfilling problem in the system. So I think somewhere that way, central banks' role is pretty much required. They're best placed to protect the public from such civilization forces or markets from these things. So I think their role is pretty much required in case of any kind of turmoil, which is even the case at this point in time in India, where we are seeing the yields shooting up almost 50 bips since the beginning of the year. So somewhere, I think policymakers from both sides need to really play their part effectively together. And I think my other point being that there is a sort of a change in interaction between fiscal and monetary policy over the years. In the 90s and 2000s, central banks obviously had ample policy space, in terms of in conventional interest rate management. But today, when we look at the world, it's a very different environment, especially in the developed markets. They're very slowly structural problems that the world is facing. There are low trend productivity growth, aging society, global excess savings. Conventional monetary policy clearly is not going to be working here. So, they need to go past that. And somewhere, especially in situations like these, like the current pandemic situation, fiscal expansion is an indispensable tool to expand growth and to ensure that this doesn't lead to any long-term cost of the crisis. I think somewhere the monetary policy comes in handy, and I think it would be wrong to constrain fiscal policies today to protect the so-called monetary dominance for tomorrow. I think quite on the contrary, using fiscal and structural policies more actively in the current environment may actually foster the central bank's independence in the medium term. So I'm a little off the route by saying that, it's fiscal dominance, which is essentially eating away monetary dominance. I don't think that is the case. In fact, more countercyclical fiscal expansion may actually result in rather lower than higher government debt in the medium term or in the longer term, so to say. So I think somewhere the coordinated fiscal and monetary stance is important, and I think it's a tad overrated. Of course, I understand the fact that on regulatory front, there should be some independence given to central banks, even back home as well. And I think there have been reform processes in the past since the 90s on that front. I don't think there's been a full stop on that front. I think the need of the hour essentially is for them to go together. And I think a part of it is a tad overrated that, there's a fiscal dominance of monetary policy at this point in time.
Well, I mean, very well explained, Madhi. Thanks for that. But then market always focuses on the short term. And, I mean, Radhika, I'll just try to bring you in here. The debt flows into the year market against the backdrop of generally lower yield globally. How does that reset with this happening? And, with the kind of rate expectations, how does that reset for you in India now with this kind of budget? Because all of us agree that on the monetary stimulus side, we've pretty much hit the lower bound.
Certainly, you hit the nail on the head. Income has become like no income, right? So it is particularly in the West. And if you were to shave off inflation, for real, it will be even lower. In some cases, it's negative. So it's not surprising therefore that liquidity has kind of moved away from bonds per se and gone into some of the other commodities, and you had the famous gold rally, and then you had the famous Bitcoin rally. So it's been going everywhere. And if you just take a ballpark, right, between ECB, Fed, and the BOJ, their balance sheets have expanded by about 60% of GDP in a matter of a year. I mean, cumulatively, right? So that is a kind of quantum of liquidity that you've seen in the system. And not surprisingly, again, not finding much returns on the other side, they've gone into equities. And part of that, in terms of EM flows, has come to Asia as well. So if I see in the past 1 year, of course, India, we have seen about upwards of $30 billion going into equities, but we are net negative on the debt. So where the money has gone in the last 12 months or so, it has gone into China, it's gone into Korea, it's gone into Malaysia. Right? These three countries have, and China to the greatest extent, has been able to draw a lot more funds. If I see year to date, this is just with the month plus duration, most of the Asian countries are beginning to get a bit of flows. And India also, we have seen in the past couple of, say a week or so, that there have been some trickle coming in. But overall, most of the Asian countries, minus probably India and Thailand for a certain extent, have started seeing debt inflows. And what are they playing for, right? So they're playing for the fact that recovery will happen here. They're playing for the fact that real rates will remain low, because inflation will come back, but not to a great extent. And they also the FX playing for FX stability. And I think that's the other thing that's playing in our favor as well, because the central bank has come out to tell us quite clearly that they will pitch for stable currency. Even if you see flows come in very strongly, they won't allow for too much strength. And I would assume if weakness resumes, they would stand in its way as well. So overall, in terms of debt flows, it has been coming to this part of the region. Yields are attractive, and I think that will continue insofar as three preconditions are met, right? You've got US dollar strength, which has just shown for this month or so, that dissipates. Yields that have gone up don't really go up too much. It went up to about 1.2%. That's the US 10-year yield. Typically, Asian bonds will do well when yields are low, dollar is weak, and you've generally got ample liquidity. So provided these three conditions don't change too much compared to 2020, I would think that flows will very much follow Asia and India in particular. I think what the budget does is gives a lot more direct towards what the issue is going to look like. But in India's case, I think we can only count on FPI to a certain extent. I think it's going to be completely a domestic story. Hence, what the RBI says, what the RBI does, and how it's able to draw in the banks and the insurance funds back into the bond market will be very, very important over the next 12 months. So FPI is coming in, I think would be an additional bonus. It'll take some pressure off. But I would think that domestic buyers would be still the one that will certainly pull the cart, or pick the burden the most.
So, Mati, what would be the early signs of changes in this kind of a flow that will, warn you off that there's something fundamentally changing in the market?
I think on a global point, yeah. So on a global point of view, I think as Radhika mentioned, I see the situation is quite positive at this point in time. You are entering a global growth scenario where you have a situation wherein, amid decent growth, you will also see addition of further liquidity. Even with a 50% increase in the balance sheet of DM central banks, you will still see a 15% plus increase in this year as well, which essentially means that they will be chasing returns in emerging markets. Now, what could change the whole dynamics is one, the vaccination drive doesn't really take a place in a very rapid fashion across the globe, and the growth recovery doesn't really sustain. Of course, that would lead to a bit of a nervousness in the market, of course, and of course the fact that if at all the growth actually turns out to be much better in the West compared to the emerging market, there could be flow back towards developed markets, especially in the equity side, because at this point in time, a lot of emerging countries are sitting with stretched equity valuation, and somewhere there could be cherry picking that could happen. India actually benefited from the fact that we started off in the equity inflows from the FPI ends much later in the rally, more towards the November-December period post the US election. Also because India was being underplayed by the West as a growth story, and we clearly outperformed our own most of the street expectation, and somewhere we were rewarded for that. So it needs to be seen whether domestically also the growth story picks up. Of course, in the as Radhika was mentioning, a large part of the flows have come essentially in equity side, not in debt side. But I think that also could improve, because I think FPIs would want to take interest in the India debt bit if at all the 10-year sort of hits at 6.5 kind of an print. Because that would probably make it look lucrative for them to enter the market. The real rates, of course, would be very lucrative at around 2.5-3% that point in time. So I think that could lead to a move of FPIs towards debt as well, because I personally believe that Reserve Bank would be there to ensure that the duration doesn't really get stretched too much. I think FPI would take cognizance of that as well. What you asked was that, when could I really assume that there could be a reversal in the flows? I think, as I said, one would be the growth picture doesn't really play out as expected. Two, probably growth doing so very well that, central banks across the globe get a little wary and talk about the tantrum bit, which I don't think would happen very honestly. I think we are, way far from that kind of level. I think this year could be a story of a stable EM flows, but cherry picking will still remain the theme, and India could play it well if the policymakers remain focused on long-term growth picture.
To a large extent, I still believe that market is not really pricing in that the global markets will start normalizing in the second half of the year as well, and that could change the flows prospect quite a lot. But let's hope we have enough time. On the other side of this market, I also hear from people who say that, Upasana, I'll try to bring you in here. There is a section of market who believe that with this whole Make in India push, with manufacturing doing so well, fundamentally changing the whole trade balance, and the flows story kind of completely changes by the end of next year, if not this year. What's your take on this? Do you really see it materially impacting the flows story?
See, Rajni, I think I am quite optimistic from various measures that have been taken over the course of last few years. It is not just about very recent, or it's not just connected to the union budget recently. But I think if we start off with looking at the reduction in corporate tax structure, we begin there. The PLI scheme, which is there, which is extremely promising, I think, as we go ahead. From all prospects, I think, it's about increasing the domestic base, the supply side bottlenecks that we have, the labor market reforms, it's underway. Most of it is not complete, but still, a lot of codes have been introduced in the parliament. There's work in progress there. On the export side as well, in terms of tax refunds, etc., we are seeing some of the other measures being announced by the government. So over the course of last 2-3 years, if you see, the government is working towards enabling a much more competitive manufacturing base. And bits and bits of it we'll see in the current budget as well, wherein the custom duty hikes on certain sector-wise, if we just look at, that also is kind of suggesting the intent of the government in terms of promoting the localization drive. So I think all in all, my sense is that this does go a long way into maybe not next 1 year, or maybe I'm not even sure whether it happens really within 2 years. But yes, yet beyond 2 years or so, I believe that the share of manufacturing will overshoot 20% and to the overall GDP, and it does have its own forward and backward linkages in terms of employment generation, etc. So it does put India again on a much higher growth path trajectory. So I would say this is again positive for the foreign investors' perspective as well. There is a lot of intent, like I mentioned earlier as well, in terms of reforms across various sectors. So liberalization of FDI, nothing new, but we've seen for the insurance sector recently, but otherwise also we've been seeing various measures on that account as well. So I think as we look at whatever measures have been adopted over the past few years, it does give you at least the future looks much more brighter from exports perspective, from a much more wider and a much more competitive manufacturing sector base. But and of course, we should not forget that the rupee itself is helping, because RBI has shown its intent towards ensuring that the rupee also does not appreciate meaningfully, especially in this kind of a world where capital has been abound. So all in all, I think the future looks good.
So Anubhuti, if I could take this forward to you, Economic Survey has actually made a case for 2% current account surplus, and trade fundamentally takes much longer to really change its trend levels. Remittances and services income have more or less been stable. What's your take? Where do you see the BOP numbers or the current account deficit or surplus numbers? How does this play out over the year?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you just talk about next year, FY22, we will switch from a one-off current account surplus to current account deficit as economic growth picks up, and that widening trend is likely to continue even in FY23 or 24. But I think we should remain sub 2%, which is an important level threshold.
On the deficit side, you mean?
Current account deficit side, yes.
Deficit side, yes.
Sub 2%. This FY22, we think it will be clearly below -1% on a current account deficit. But on the balance of payment perspective, especially if we just focus on FY22, I think the pipeline looks very robust. What other panelists also mentioned, the FDI, I think that's a very, very important factor to keep in mind. When the rest of the world saw the FDI pipeline drying out completely, India saw net $40 billion and huge amount of lumpy inflows coming in during the pandemic. FPI flows, I am a little cautious on debt-related FPI flows unless Euroclear is announced, but equity-related flows are likely to come in on better growth prospects. And of course, you will have the other inflows like banking sector related inflows coming through. So balance of payment outlook looks pretty robust. It might not be at $100 billion like FY21, but $50 billion looks highly possible to me. On the other question of current account surplus, I think we are a long, long way to move to a sustained current account surplus. It's good to have it as a priority, but we are a commodity. Let's be realistic. We are a commodity-dependent economy. The manufacturing is expanding, but our import intensity, even for a lot of our exports, are pretty high. Electronic smartphones are a very good example in that context. So moving towards a current account surplus, in my view, is a decades story, and definitely not a few years story.
So then that kind of puts us back in the market flux that it is. Fundamentally, your FDIs and FPIs do believe kind of stay dependent on your growth story, and growth story in turn is dependent on the capital flow. So where does it that's what's making the asset market so volatile. If you've seen the kind of GSEC sell-off in last 2 days, while there is of course a section of market that believes that in its MPC announcements on Friday, there will be some clear indications to get it back to 6%. But how do then we look at key levels for either the rates or the currency for the next quarter and over the year playing out? Because these are primarily the factors that keeping asset market very volatile. I've kind of mentioned in one of the notes that this kind of a local taper tantrum will probably happen much more frequently this year, because the fundamentals still take some time to catch up, and asset market remains very, very dependent on this kind of a news flow. So how do you see that playing out? Upasana, maybe you could start with your rate expectations.
Yes, so I think here it's very important to keep in mind that now that the government has taken that leap forward, clearly, somewhere the monetary policy can stay put where they are. And that does provide them a breather. But how much of a breather is again questionable, because where we stand today, we need to go back to pre-pandemic levels of normalization of policy. We can, so the point is the excesses that were introduced during the pandemic need to be removed. That doesn't mean tightening per se, but we need to remove the excesses. Now, to that extent, somewhere the gradual withdrawal of policy to the extent that let's take an example that the overnight rates right now are below the reverse repo. That is one. Secondly, the corridor is extremely wide. So the reverse repo is 65 basis below the repo rate. All of this needs to be normalized to somewhere closer to the pre-pandemic levels. Now, how much time does it take for us to move there is again debatable. But my sense is through the course of next 1 year, we will see this normalization take place, even if the repo rate remains unchanged. So, the overnight rates, the shorter end of the curve continues to remain under pressure. Apart from that, of course, we should not forget, and we've discussed at length that there's been an excessive fiscal impulse that has been announced. So clearly that has an implication on the supply side. So there is going to be immense amount of supply pressure also next year. And that is where the biggest challenge for RBI would be, I think, how to manage that smoothly, how we're going to see that happen. Because this year was relatively easy because there was no credit offtake. Banks had ample liquidity and they parked in GSEC. So there has to be some kind of a balance which RBI will have to maintain, because like Anubhuti said, I would agree that balance of payment will continue to remain surplus. Now, if the intention is to ensure that rupee does not appreciate meaningfully, so from the FX side, liquidity infusion continues. We are already in a structurally huge liquidity surplus. Can RBI afford to do a OMO purchase in that sense to, mop up the extra supply that is there? Now, these are challenges which RBI is going to face as we go ahead. But I think, yes, it's going to be an important aspect to keep in mind. And hence, I think the 10-year, if I was to look at, let's say, 10-year yield, we are actually looking at the shift moving towards 6.5% easily. So the range is probably 6.25 to 6.75. But if I was to give a midpoint, then probably somewhere around 6.5%.
So Anubhuti, then we're expecting GSEC to move on to 650, 675. Most of us are expecting RBI to stay put on any rate action this year as we kind of normalize on the demand uptake. And at the same time, I think the kind of fiscal bazooka we've got in the budget, I don't think it leaves RBI with much space to do it. So how do you see this challenge that RBI is facing playing out through the year, and how does that work out over the next few quarters?
Sure. So I would agree with Upasana. I think rates have clearly bottomed out. We estimate that the supply overhang for the bonds market in FY22 is likely to be 5 to 7 trillion. No, INR 5 to 7 trillion. To put it in context, it used to be the annual borrowing by the central government in pre-pandemic years. So clearly, it puts RBI in a tight spot. But at the same time, the reality is that if RBI doesn't intervene in the market rates would fly off. and the monetary policy transmission, which has just started, can get deterred or killed right right at the beginning of the whole transmission channel. So I would assume, and we would expect RBI to intervene, but of course, the extent of intervention which we expected before this budget announcement is likely to be much lower. It's impossible for RBI to also go and absorb a 5 to 7 trillion of excess supply, and therefore yields will keep on moving higher. We are looking at a range of 620 to 640 for December till December 2021. And of course, the big assumption there is that RBI will keep on intervening in the rates market in a very aggressive manner. On the question of how RBI really manages, we all have been talking about this impossible trinity: managing the FX market by not allowing FX to appreciate, managing the rates market by not allowing yields to just spike massively and interfere in the transmission channel, and at the same time ensuring that liquidity excesses do not spill over into asset bubbles. I would say that one important lesson from calendar year 2020 is that RBI has a lot of tools in its kit, and they really deployed it very smartly in the previous year. I would say that RBI has still a lot of tools which it can deploy to manage all the three factors. For instance, when we talk about liquidity infusion, a lot of it can be managed by doing long-term reverse repo or by doing OMOs along with market stabilization scheme bonds issuances. I mean, MSS, if you remember, was introduced by RBI in order to manage huge FX inflows. And I think 2021 is a very good year to go ahead and reuse that tool. Of course, what will become extremely important is a clear communication with the market at large. Unless the intent is clearly communicated, deployment of tool might not just be enough. So I would say it's very challenging year for RBI ahead, tough task cut out for them, but they did a very good job in 2020. I would expect them to continue doing that in 2021. But it's important to remember that somewhere market rates have to get a little higher and probably a little bit more closer to what the fundamental dictates.
So Radhika, if I could then take it on to the next asset in terms of the currency. So rates gradually inching up. If the growth story builds up, then probably flows stay as stable as they are. Then what's your outlook on the currency? Then how do you see the USD INR playing out through the year?
Certainly, to Anubhuti's point, there was the impossible trinity, and we were calling it, the central bank is walking a balance beam, right? They're trying to juggle many objectives. And at some point, it did seem like the currency will be the one that will be let go, to give them some space to act on the other asset classes. Going into 2021, what is interesting is that routinely when the central bank, doesn't say anything about the currency beyond to say that we are there only to lower volatility or keep volatility in check. Departing from that tradition, the governor in one of the speeches categorically mentioned that that the currency, implied that the currency, what we have been acting on it to keep it stable will continue. And I think biggest takeaway for me, and I think that is what the market has assumed, that when that US currency manipulator list came out, and we did figure on it. Of course, we don't tick all the boxes, but particularly because of intervention, we had figured on it, that he did imply that, that won't be a constraint. So, they will try to keep the rupee stable, even in the face of flows, insofar as the flows are volatile and the flows are destabilizing, when they come in with the pace with which they go out, right? So that was a difference which we felt as against past. Earlier, I personally was thinking that the rupee would be the adjusting variable. And secondly, soon after that, we saw the new REER being announced as the real effective exchange rate, where now the rupee seems to be at fair value. So I think putting these things together, it does look like while the flows picture, the balance of payments picture, current account with a slight negative suggests that overall dollar will still be in surplus in the system. But I don't think one can assume that that's going to translate into rupee strength. So we do think going into 2021, that the currency is going to be in a consolidative phase to a slightly lower, right? And that lower would be more to do with the dollar bias rather than flows driven. So insofar as the central bank stands by to keep the currency stable, firstly, not to react to the flows. Secondly, also, going to Basna's point about keeping it a bit more competitive, given that the overall manufacturing push is ongoing. So I think that there's going to be two-way forces, but the central bank stands. And when they do, I don't think it will amount to too much of rupee strength. So for us, as a view this year, we do think the dollar rupee will be in a consolidative phase to slightly lower, 20-30 paisa or so, but not really a kind of and just to, as my final point, in 2020, when rest of the currencies actually appreciated very strongly, we were one out of the two currencies which were net down on the year. I think we will see that kind of bias. And overall, I think it's a very prudent FX management, because you really don't want to be swayed by this kind of metrics. And since if I were to compare India, since the taper tantrum, or if I were to compare India's reserves since 2020, I think we are at the highest among the Asian peers, ex-Japan, of course, but the other Asian countries. So I think that buffer prudently will continue to be in place.
So Madhvi, then that leaves us with the only other asset class that is sentimentally much more relevant for the market. How do you see the equity markets then?
I'm not really an equity person. I would prefer you ask me debt and FX. But I'm definitely not an equity person. But I think the market seems to be pretty much buoyant. I think there seems to be a lot of positivity in the market, especially post-budget. The sense is that this government is, as it is getting more transparent, as it is looking beyond the convention with regard to giving impetus to growth, there's a more long-term story that could be played out. What we understand from FPIs as well, they seem to be very excited about the India story. So I think on that front also equity flows would continue. But of course, valuation bit, I am not an expert on that front. So not the best person to answer whether one should be entering equity at this level. I'm not too sure.
Markets don't seem to be.
I think everybody's gone wrong on equities in the last 6 months. Every top is seen as, this is the best that you could get. But, clearly market has been surprised on the upside every time we reach a top. So I think I'd leave it to the equity guys to decide whether it is still the time to enter or probably exit the market at these levels. So.